In the previous section, you learned how property can be held by one person in severalty or by two or more individuals in forms of co-ownership, such as tenancy in common or community property. Now, we turn our attention to one of the most distinctive and powerful forms of shared ownership, joint tenancy. This ownership structure is frequently chosen by married couples, family members, or close business partners because it provides a unique feature known as the right of survivorship. When two or more people own property as joint tenants, they share a single unified interest in the entire property. This means that each owner does not own a fractional portion, but rather, each owns the whole. For instance, if two people purchase a home as joint tenants, each owns 100% of the property, not 50%. They both have the right to occupy and use the entire property, and neither can divide it or claim exclusive possession of any portion. The most defining feature of joint tenancy is the right of survivorship. When one joint tenant dies, their ownership interest does not pass to their heirs or through probate. It automatically transfers to the surviving joint tenant or tenants. This process continues until one owner remains, at which point the ownership converts to tenancy in severalty, meaning that the survivor becomes the sole owner. For example, if three siblings, Anna, Brian, and Carla, own property as joint tenants and Anna dies, Brian and Carla each become owners of 50% with full survivorship rights. If Brian later passes away, Carla automatically becomes the sole owner of the entire property. In order for a valid joint tenancy to exist, 4 legal unities must be present. These unities are fundamental to the creation and continuation of the ownership form. They are: unity of interest. All owners must hold equal ownership interests in the property. Each must have an identical type of estate, such as fee simple ownership, with equal rights to income, profits, and obligations. If one co-owner holds a different type or size of interest, joint tenancy cannot exist. Unity of title. All owners must receive title through the same deed or conveyance. This ensures that their interests arise from the same legal instrument and not through separate transactions. Unity of time. All owners must acquire their interest at the same time. If one party acquires their ownership later, the joint tenancy will not be valid. Unity of possession. All joint tenants have equal rights to use and possess the entire property. No one can exclude another or claim exclusive control over any part of the property. If any one of these unities is broken, the joint tenancy is severed, and the ownership automatically converts to a tenancy in common. For example, if one joint tenant sells their interest to another person, the buyer becomes a tenant in common with the remaining joint tenants because the unity of time and title no longer exists. Let's apply this to an example. Suppose that 3 friends, Alex, Blake, and Casey, own a property as joint tenants. If Casey sells their interest to Dana, Dana becomes a tenant in common with Alex and Blake, while Alex and Blake remain joint tenants with each other. If Alex dies, Blake automatically inherits Alex's share through the right of survivorship, but Dana's interest remains separate as a tenancy in common. Joint tenancy and tenancy in common share similarities in that both provide equal possession rights. However, they differ in significant ways. In a tenancy in common, co-owners can hold unequal shares and may transfer their interests freely by will or sale. There is no right of survivorship, so when one tenant dies, their share becomes part of their estate. In contrast, joint tenancy requires equal shares and includes survivorship rights that bypass probate. A joint tenancy can also be compared to tenancy by the entirety, which is a special form of ownership available only to married couples in some states. Tenancy by the entirety includes the same 4 unities and the right of survivorship, but neither spouse can sell or encumber the property without the other's consent. The tenancy can only be dissolved by mutual agreement, divorce, or death. Creation of a joint tenancy. To create a joint tenancy, the 4 unities must be present, unity of time, title, interest, and possession. The deed or will must clearly state the intention to create a joint tenancy by including specific wording such as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Without this language, most states, including Arizona, will presume the ownership to be a tenancy in common. A single owner may also create a joint tenancy by deeding the property to themselves and one or more others as joint tenants. Termination of joint tenancy. A joint tenancy can be terminated in several ways. Severance by sale or transfer. If one owner sells or transfers their share, the joint tenancy is severed for that portion, and the new owner becomes a tenant in common with the remaining joint tenants. Partition action. Any co-owner can file a court action known as a partition suit, requesting that the property be divided or sold. If the property cannot be fairly divided, the court may order its sale and distribute the proceeds among the owners. Foreclosure or bankruptcy. Legal proceedings against one joint tenant may end their ownership and sever the joint tenancy. Once the joint tenancy is broken, the right of survivorship no longer applies to the severed share. Example in practice. Let's say that two business partners, Maria and Carlos, own an office building as joint tenants. Carlos decides to sell his interest to an investor named David. The sale destroys the unity of title and time, converting the ownership into a tenancy in common between Maria and David. If Maria later passes away, her share will go to her heirs, not to David, since survivorship no longer exists. Advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of joint tenancy is its simplicity in transferring ownership upon death. It eliminates the need for probate, which saves time and legal costs. However, it also has limitations. A joint tenant cannot will their interest to someone outside the ownership group, and creditors of one joint tenant can still attach their interest in the property. Review summary. Joint tenancy is a form of concurrent ownership in which two or more people share an equal, undivided interest in the entire property with the right of survivorship. To create it, the four unities, interest, title, time, and possession, must exist. Each co-owner holds equal rights and obligations, and no single owner can sell or alter the property without affecting the form of ownership. If one tenant sells their interest, the unity is broken, and the new owner holds as a tenant in common. When all but one joint tenant dies, the survivor becomes the sole owner through tenancy in severalty. Discussion. Why is the right of survivorship important in joint tenancy? Answer. It allows ownership to pass automatically to the surviving co-owners without going through probate, simplifying the transfer of title. How does a joint tenancy differ from a tenancy in common? Answer. In joint tenancy, co-owners hold equal shares and have survivorship rights, while tenants in common may have unequal shares and no survivorship rights. What happens if one joint tenant sells their share to someone else? Answer. The sale breaks the unity of title and time, converting that portion into a tenancy in common. Why is the unity of possession significant in joint tenancy? Answer. It ensures that each joint tenant has equal access and use of the entire property, regardless of ownership percentage. Closing remarks. Joint tenancy combines equal ownership with simplicity in inheritance through the right of survivorship. It provides security for co-owners, especially couples or family members, who wish for ownership to transfer automatically upon death. However, it requires careful creation and maintenance of the four unities, since any break can convert the arrangement to a tenancy in common. Real estate professionals must understand this balance of rights and restrictions to guide clients toward the ownership form that best suits their personal, financial, and estate planning goals.